Okay, well, let's go ahead and get started. This is the Container Storage Interface meeting, first meeting in 2021. As a reminder, this meeting is public, recorded, and published on YouTube. So as you can see, we don't have much on the agenda today. Maybe what we can do is discuss any outstanding items that we had from last time. I think I missed that last meeting. For those of you who were here, do you remember any items that we need to finish talking about?
So we had a fair amount of discussion on FS group and permissions. Hamad, I think, was just going to open up a PR and we could continue discussing there.
Okay.
I think we had a couple meetings ago, we talked about increasing the length limitation. I'm not sure what the next steps were for that. Are we ready to open up a PR for that, or does that need more discussion?
Let's pull up notes here and see what we had.
I think we're ready to make PR. I will make a PR this week.
Okay. And what did we conclude that we're going to update all the relevant fields?
Yeah, I think for different lengths, we have different conclusion.
Okay.
If you can, look at the.
There we go. Yeah. Update spec, update path from 128 to 256, update node ID from 128 to 253. And
I think there actually, Hamad was saying there might be a problem for updating the path length because systemd seems to have some path length restriction. And actually, I think he said the existing 128 is already too long.
I think that might have been why we limited it to 253 or 256 instead.
I think, yeah, but I think Hamad was saying even with 128 today, systemd still has problems.
Oh, interesting.
But yeah, maybe for paths, we should follow up with Hamad again, but
okay.
I think other things are okay.
Let me write that down. Was previous conclusion. Okay.
I just have a question on node ID. It looks like we're increasing it to 253. Is that the Kubernetes maximum or something? Or
I
DNS?
believe so, yeah. So I think if you look at the Kubernetes naming, the length limit is 253, or yeah. Yep, cannot be more than 253 characters. Okay, I think we have clarity on the next steps here. Jaiwei, you're going to follow up on that?
Yes, yeah.
Sounds good. Okay, anything else we want to talk about today? I don't see Ben here, so I think those items are.
Ben is here.
Oh, is he?
Hey,
oh, yeah. Hey, welcome. How are you feeling?
I'm mostly better today, thank you.
Glad to hear. Did you want to discuss any of these items, Ben?
I think we covered what needed to be covered.
Okay,
in the December meeting.
perfect. Okay, so I guess then there are going to be a set of outstanding PRs that are going to go out. We'll need to review them and decide at what point to cut a new version of CSI. Is there a target that we should set?
If we want to make changes, if any of these changes are needed in Kubernetes core, then it would be good to cut this with ample time for Kubernetes code freeze. Which, let me look up that.
Do we have any pending changes from Hammond on one extension?
I believe so. So from the last meeting, there was this pull request.
Looks like dates have not been set for 1.21,
Okay.
but I would expect early March.
Yep.
Or am I, is that right? Usually enhancements freeze is like a month into the quarter and code freeze is a month after that.
Yeah, that sounds right. And I also do not see a 121. So yeah, I would assume it would be code freezes sometime in February. So AWS code freeze should be sometime in February. We should get a CSI release by first week Feb. Does that seem reasonable?
Sounds good.
Okay. So that means we got to get these PRs all reviewed and merged pretty much as soon as possible. What's the next release? 1.5?
For another topic,
Mm-hmm.
I think this was something actually Ben brought up in the 2.0 issue, but I think we don't actually have an access mode today that represents multiple pods running on the same node
Oh, yes.
for a read write once volume.
Yeah, from my reading of the spec, it looks like when the spec was originally drafted that the multi-writer access mode for CSI was intended to refer to what Kubernetes would consider RWX. But then somehow along the drafting of the spec, it got redefined so that multi-writer meant any situation where you had multiple pods accessing the same volume. And so then the ability to distinguish between multiple pods on one node versus multiple pods on multiple nodes got lost at the CSI level. And
Yeah, basically what happened was originally we didn't want to introduce the notion of anything saying like, oh, there's a node or there is not a node. It would be multi-writer or single writer. And that was kind of a utopian view, but we're trying to make it fit with Kubernetes, and Kubernetes has strange existing behavior where it allows, if some volumes to not be multi-writer except if the pods all land on the same node, which we always thought of as a bug, not as a feature, but it is effectively a feature now.
Yeah, it really
Yeah,
is.
I guess the thing is like users sometimes depend on it,
Yeah.
and we actually have E2E tests that exercise that path explicitly. So CSI drivers that strictly conform to the spec can't pass those tests.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, in this previous issue, oh, we don't actually have the issue. I remember there was a long thread. We
Yeah.
were discussing options.
So yeah, we identified this problem more than a year ago, and we had a long discussion about it, and we decided that the only ways to address it would be to either make a backwards incompatible change, which did not appeal to us at the time, or to like go define new access modes on top of the existing ones, and then like add capability bits and do a whole rigmarole to figure out if the CSI plugin and the CO both understand these new access modes that would add in the what Kubernetes understands to be multiple pods on the same node.
Mm-hmm.
And then we decided that would just be so gross to layer on top of the existing code that we said let's deal with this when we do 2.0. That was sort of where we ended that.
Mm-hmm.
And it seemed like a good idea, because without doing something backwards incompatible, adding new access modes would be very complicated.
I guess I'm not sure I see why adding a new access mode would be complicated. Like, would it not just be a single node multi-writer access mode?
Well, there would be the question of what you call it, because the existing names sort of imply the opposite of what they actually are, and I think that's for historical reasons. But I think the other concern was just backwards compatibility. So if you have a new CO talking to an old SP that doesn't understand these new access modes, and it sends it, you're going to have problems. So you have to do some sort of a capability check that says, do you understand the new access modes? And the plugin has to say yes before the SP could use them. And if you have an older CO and a newer SP, then I guess that's not so bad. But I don't know, when we thought through like how would we actually fix this in a backwards compatible way, it seemed really complicated and nasty. Maybe now we have the appetite to fix it because the existing pain is too bad and we don't want to do a 2.0 thing. But yeah, like I think at a minimum you would need a capability so that the plugin could assert that it understood the expanded access modes.
Now, one ugly tool that we have in our tool chest is that gRPC allows you to rename fields while keeping the existing number for the field. So effectively, it stays the same field, but it is visually renamed. So you could change the existing multi-node single writer to what the effective behavior is today, which is multi-pod single writer. Or
but that's going to cause compilation errors when users of the CSI library update
that's true.
their Git repos, right?
Well, actually, yeah.
I mean,
Well, I guess across an update, yes. So as soon as they pick up the new version of the library, it would cause their existing code to break.
that doesn't seem desirable.
Yeah. That's why we
I guess,
pushed it to
sorry,
2.0.
today's multi-node single writer, I don't think read write once drivers are gonna support that, right? Because they can't support the multi-node part of things.
Is that what it's actually called, multi-node single writer?
Here's what they're currently called. Let me copy them in. Single node writer, single node reader, multi-node writer,
Yeah, multi-node single writer, multi-node multi-writer.
okay, so this is what we have today.
Wait, where is
But-
this? Okay.
But then the documentation explicitly spells out that by node they mean workload, not node, which is where it gets super confusing.
I don't know. I get if you go with like the actual naming of the field, I feel like no read write once volume is going to support any of the multi-node modes.
Right, but multi-node, multi-writer is defined just to mean multiple pods.
Yeah, that's
And-
fine. I'm just saying so today, theoretically, the read write once storage that can support multiple pods on the same node, that scenario is not represented here.
Right.
And like, so any read write once volume, like I think the intention was that this multi-node, multi-writer one would address that, but then no actual read write once volume type can support multi-node.
The question is, do we even need to make the change at the CSI level? Why does the plugin care? This seems
Because
like
well so the plugin is being asked to validate a capability. So if the CO says I need multi-writer support, the plugin doesn't know if those multiple writers are going to be on the same node or not. So in order to be safe, it has to say I can't do that. And then
but I mean, what I guess what I'm arguing for is all it's being asked is, do you support multi-writer across nodes or just on a single node? Nothing else, right? And so if it says I support,
that's what
So-
Kubernetes wants to know.
So now if that's the case, as far as CSI is concerned, the plugin just says, I am a single node writer. That is it.
Yes, and I think the problem is the problem is single node writer also the way it's defined, it's also single writer.
Right, it's single pod writer and multi-pod
Yes.
writer. Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
no, it's just single pod writer.
Oh, I see. Because of the
The
mapping.
way that it's written.
I see.
I think the way that the comment has it for this one is that only one writer,
So
even on one node.
if you open up the spec and go to the docs for node published volume, there's a table, and this table is where all of the problems come from, because the table basically spells out that if you don't support multi-node and you try to publish to two pods, even if they're on the same node, it must not work. Like you must get failed precondition, which is sort of the opposite of what we want. So all the problems come from the documentation for node published volume and how it interacts with these access modes.
Right. I recently reviewed the spec because I've got customers asking for this, and that table is the only place I found the discrepancy. And so
yes.
I question, can't we just fix the table if that's the behavior
it would be a
we
backwards
want?
incompatible change. Like that's yes, well, we could just fix the table and say, you know what, we were kidding up until now, but there's a whole bunch of implementations that may depend on that table, the way the table defines things.
Yeah, from an implementer's point of view, though, it's confusing because you have tests that expect the opposite behavior of the table.
Yes.
So, I mean, where we're headed is put in a install time flag that says which way you want it to work, which is really kind of gross.
Oh, like have it spec compliant or do it the way you actually want it flag?
Yeah.
I guess though, like for the way, like I guess from a CO perspective, is a CO really going to validate that, the scenario and returning precondition error?
It's not the CO's job, right? It's the plugin to verify.
Yeah, I guess what I mean though is like if a plugin technically implements against the spec and supports a multi-pod writing, is that like what ramifications are there for that? Like, is a CO actually going to care?
No, I think that if an SP violates the spec, nothing bad happens. But if an SP follows the spec and a CO violates it, bad things can happen because there's a theoretical concern that SPs may actually want to limit a volume to just one pod, like really just one pod on a node. And if you try to publish it to a second pod on the same node, that may need to fail for good reason.
Why would an SP want to do that though?
They could have some sort of workload-based security scheme going on, so that they do maybe encryption based on the identity of the individual workload, and if a second workload comes along, like they would need different encryption keys, or conceivably. I mean, and all this would be outside of the CSI spec because you're not supposed to get a lot of information about the identity of the workload. You just get a published path, but like there was a concern expressed at earlier CSI meetings by some of the other contributors that there may be a good reason to really limit it to just one pod. And while Kubernetes maybe doesn't care, like we don't want to take away that ability in the act of fixing this discrepancy, so that you may want to be able to limit it to as many pods as you want on one node, or you may really want to be able to limit it to really just one pod on one node. And so
I guess in that case though, then returning an error is fine, because if the CO does call it multiple times, they'll still return an error, and that's fine.
Yeah. Okay. So you're saying relax the specs so that the SPs can choose to do either behavior, but the COs are still forced to deal with the possibility of a getting failed precondition.
Yeah.
And then SPs just have to, decide which behavior they want to support. So if they really want to limit it to just one pod, they can do that. But if they want to say, hey, I'll do as many times as you want in the same pod. I guess that I'm trying to think what prevents you from getting into a situation where you accidentally try to publish it to two different nodes? Who's going to enforce that doesn't happen when it's not supposed to happen?
That should be enforced in controller publish.
Yeah, we would have to make changes on the mount side, on the Kubernetes mount side, to say, okay, if you get such and such error at controller publish time, and this is the second pod using this volume, then effectively treat this as a terminal error. Assuming we don't put in that behavior and the SP simply just keeps returning an error, that might even be sufficient, because Kubernetes will keep retrying and saying, oh, I'm trying to mount this second volume on the second pod that I think should work, but the SP can decide, no, it doesn't work. And the mount error can say, hey, you already have a pod using this, and this strict enforcement is enabled, and, this is not allowed, and that'll get surfaced up to the user.
I guess the other ramification, not on the CSI side, but on the Kubernetes side, is Kubernetes has E2E tests that specifically check this behavior. And I guess what we're saying is that behavior should be optional instead of required.
Yeah.
And is that going to be problematic from a consumer perspective, where consumers may have, started relying on this behavior, and then now the behavior is going to be different across different SPs?
Yeah, so I guess it would break if the expectation is that consumer expects that they can do multi-pod on a single node, and a SP chooses to not support that. But I guess the question is, do all existing SPs support multi-pod single node?
Many do,
Mm-hmm.
but I think that's also mainly because we have the test that checks it. So
I
if
see.
SPs were running those tests, then they would have failed those tests if they were strictly following the spec.
I think actually that test will only be executed when the SP has multi-volume capability. So I think technically that's already an optional test, isn't it?
You mean multi-node?
Multi-volume. It's called multi-volume in our end-to-end test suite.
Oh, okay.
But I don't think that's not controlled by a test capability.
Oh, really?
There's a subset
let me
of
check.
tests. There's a subset of tests that will do multi-writer, and multi-writer is a capability, but multi-volume on a single node is not an optional thing today. And to clarify, these tests we're talking about are Kubernetes tests. They're not E2E. They're not CSI tests.
So then I want to go back to that question of why does the SP care, right? If I think the argument that I heard was they may want to treat every pod as different, and that's fine. So for example, you have different encryption keys and you cannot encrypt the same volume with multiple encryption keys. I guess that implies that the second pod that tries to use the volume should result in a failed mount. And if it does that, I guess Michelle's argument is that that is incompatible or breaking behavior change.
Well, how is it breaking behavior if it's what the spec says you should do today? I'm confused.
I guess it's a user expectation thing, right? This is the current behavior, is that all existing SPs support this multi-pod single node behavior. And if we let an SP start to choose whether they support this behavior or not, effectively it looks like a backwards compatibility breaking change to the user, even though there is no guarantee that this would always work.
Okay.
Which is actually like, this is the same argument we have on the Kubernetes side for this behavior to begin with. I think there were some calls to say, hey, let's just drop that behavior and really make it single pod. But the pushback was there are people that might be depending on this behavior explicitly and it would break them.
Yeah, it's too useful to just rip away.
Yeah. So Amant, yeah.
Yeah, sorry. This affects like the FS group also has, like if multiple parts are trying to use the same volume, but they specify different FS group, then one of them will lose access to the volume. So if, I mean, it's kind of broken right now. Both FS group and SLNX. Yeah, but SLNX is more rare, but yeah.
So that kind of brings us back full circle to the other option, which is introduce a new set of mappings.
Well, the concerns that Haman are raising are not SP side concerns, they're CO side concerns. Like
Mm-hmm.
the CO is the one that cares about multiple pods trying to share the same volume on the same node with different security settings. The SP doesn't care. That's the CO stepping on its own feet.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe the CO just has to say, hey, wait, if you're using FS group settings, you can't have two pods accessing the same volume on the same node because it's not going to work.
You
Yeah.
can, you just have to make sure they use the same settings.
Well, I don't know how you document that though. Like from an, because that's a Kubernetes API level thing. Like if it's not going to work in some cases and it is going to work in other cases, you have to be able to explain to the user what those cases are.
I think this goes
so I
back
think you
to
can say
that.
if it, well,
Sorry, what was that, Michelle?
I for the FS group issue, we can clearly document that if you're gonna have multiple pods sharing the same volume, they all need to have the same FS group. I think that's not a difficult thing to document.
Yeah, that's true. Like it's not difficult, but
Like if they don't do that, then their workloads are gonna fail, right? So it's in the user's best interest to actually do this correctly.
I would just, yeah, it just has so many like edge cases, like how we are struggling with subpath and SLNX, like where it's, yeah, we can document it, but for SLNX it's especially tricky where you can just mount a subpath with a different setting, even though the volume is same. So it's a problem. It would have been nicer if we, sorry.
I was gonna say, about my specific concern is that like we can document how it works today, but like there's no good reason for it to work that way going forward. Like if we had a better mechanism to support FS groups or security, we would use that, and then this particular restriction would just disappear. So it's like we have a restriction that manifests as a limitation at the API level, but that's just due to implementation limitations that we hope to get rid of someday. So that's kind of hard to explain.
No, I was just understand. I was just saying that like it would have been nicer if it would have been, our job would have been easier if we did not support that in CO side. But I think it's too late. But it's too late to take the decision now. But because even if we document it and like you said, Ben, like if we had better APIs, better ways of applying FS group, it would not have been problem. But FS group is not the only thing. The SLNX context is also another thing that is problematic, and they suffer from same problem. You have two parts trying to use same volume, they can potentially specify different context, and one of them will block the other. And SLNS case, it's slightly worse because
Yeah, so it sounds like anytime you have any sort of permission settings for a given volume and you have that volume being consumed by multiple pods, you have this issue.
At least the way that we do permission settings today. Like I see a future where like this is less of an issue, and so like I'm loath to encode into the API these limitations that are based on stuff that we can't do now, but we could do in the future, because then when we can do them, how are we going to fix the API?
Yeah, I think this is kind of pointing to we're starting at the wrong end of the problem. This is really a Kubernetes problem. We need to figure out what the right approach is on the Kubernetes side and then make targeted changes or improvements on the CSI side to handle it. Because on the Kubernetes side, we have a behavior that users have come to expect that is not encoded in the API. And we can't pull it out. Users will get upset. If we rename it, that is also problematic because users are going to see that as backwards incompatible. So we need to do something to allow for the differentiation and being more explicit on the Kubernetes API while being backwards compatible. And then once we have that ability on the Kubernetes API, we can think about how we surface that to the SP side and go from there.
So are you thinking of maybe adding a new access modes and a capability that lets an SP say that it supports the additional access modes? Is that
Yeah, that's what I'm
direction you're
thinking. Yeah, because
Okay.
we have a behavior today where it claims to be single writer, but it's not really single writer. There's like this in-between mode where it's multi-pod single node writer, whatever we want to call that.
Okay.
And if we can somehow find a way to handle that, then this starts to get cleaner because at least the notion of these different behaviors exists in the Kubernetes API for the user to express their intent. And when the user's intent is clear, then it's just a matter of making sure that we're communicating that properly to the SP. I think we're all in agreement that having the SP try and guess the intent is problematic because they may guess incorrectly. And if each SP just arbitrarily decides per volume what they want to do, we end up in an even worse place because it's unpredictable and you no longer have consistency across different Kubernetes implementations.
Yeah.
But that's a bigger challenge of how do we introduce a new access mode on the Kubernetes side in a backwards compatible way that makes logical sense in terms of naming as well.
I didn't understand what you were saying. You're saying add a new Kubernetes access mode, not a
Yes.
new CSI access mode.
Right.
Oh. So right now we
Well,
just have
it might correlate,
ROX.
right? A new Kubernetes access mode may require a new CSI access mode.
Right.
The
Potentially. But we'll start on the CSI or on the Kubernetes side, and then we'll come back and look at the CSI side.
So we have been planning to at least like right now, when this happens, at least FS group SLNX thingy, then the pods fail in unexpected ways. We have been planning to reject these pods via kubelets when kubelet's admission controller actually. So the errors are more explicit that the pods are being rejected because another pod is using this volume with different security settings. So I mean that's the plan. So we have to do something with the access mode when it becomes a reality if it's defined in Kubernetes API.
So currently there are plans to have more explicit errors in some of these cases.
Yeah, we want to have more explicit errors at least, like kubelet rejecting the pods rather than like failing it in weird ways.
And which conditions would they reject pods?
The plan is to if a pod is using a volume with given SLNX context and our FS group, and another pod is trying to use it with the same volume with different FS group, then rather than allowing the pod to run, the kubelet will reject it during the admission process.
Got it. And I think that's fine because those behaviors don't actually work today.
Yeah.
And if we end up returning errors for them, we're just making that more obvious. And if in the future we say we're going to allow supporting that behavior through some new Kubernetes access mode, that should be okay as well, because it's loosening a restriction, not tightening it.
I vaguely remember when I was working on the local volume stuff, I wanted to actually enforce this. And I remember that we had a chat with Paul Morey, who said that it may be possible you can still have two different FS groups, and the pods will still be able to work.
Interesting.
And so, yeah, I think because of that discussion, we didn't do a hard enforcement in the local volume plugin. We did this like soft warning thing, and it was not so ideal. But we'll need to revisit that if we actually do want to add enforcement.
That's true for FS group to some extent. There are like edge cases, but yeah, but not at all. The volume will not work at all for SLNX because there's and like yeah, the security contexts. Although I wonder if you can specify a security context where it can be a superset of two different SLNS contexts. So in which case we might have to think. I'll be like same as this FS group, right? You can specify to different FS group, but maybe have the both FS group added to supplemental groups of the pod. That's what you're thinking, right, Michelle?
Yeah, that's the main scenario. I mean, theoretically, all of that is you should be able to check that.
Okay, so does anybody want to champion this on the Kubernetes side? Maybe put together a CAP proposing something? Or should we put it on the back burner for now and revisit it at another point?
I guess if we put it on the back burner, then is the conclusion that this behavior should be optional and users should not come to expect that all SPs are going to support this?
That's the status quo, isn't it?
Yeah.
So yeah, if we don't do anything, I think the status quo stands, and it's just gross.
I mean, today all SPs are forced to support it, right? Because of the CSI test that's there.
I mean, if they want to pass the test, then yes, they have to, but there's nothing requiring them to pass the test.
Mm-hmm. So presumably there could be inconsistency.
Customers are already feeling the pain of the inconsistency, though, and they call up providers that are following the spec and ask them why they're broken compared to this or that other driver.
Is this being tested on the CSI side, or I think this is only being tested
This
on
is
the
a
Kubernetes side,
Kubernetes
right?
test, yes. But, you know, to most consumers, they don't care if it's at the Kubernetes layer or at the CSI layer, right? They only care about the layer they're using.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it sounds like the problem is you know, there is behavior that exists that isn't documented in the API. Users have come to expect it. SPs aren't quite sure what they should be doing because the spec is inconsistent, the implementation is inconsistent, and they're stuck in a hard place. The right thing to do is to make changes on the Kubernetes side and possibly on the CSI side as well. Next step would be to get somebody to take ownership of this end to end. Maybe we can bring it up at the Kubernetes meeting to see if someone is willing to pick it up as a 121 design project.
Sounds good.
Okay, I'll go ahead and add it to the agenda for the next Kubernetes meeting. Okay, good discussion. Anything else on that topic? Okay, we've got about 9 minutes left. Anything else anybody wants to discuss before we end it? Okay, then we will call it for today, and we'll reconvene. I guess we're back on our usual schedule, which is once a month. Everybody okay with that, or should we meet more frequently?
You can stick with the.
I guess we're trying to cut a new release
Correct.
by early February.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it might make sense to do one in 2 weeks just to touch base and see where we are.
I think I have to open a PR for the GID thing, so it might be useful to actually like meet in 2 weeks. If
Okay.
possible.
So I just want to check that making sure that doesn't overlap with the data protection working group, because that also happens bi-weekly on Wednesday. So I'll just check.
Yeah, I'm looking at the 20th. I don't see anything at on the morning of the 20th. I think the
Okay.
next meeting is on the 20th at 10 a.m. So, and that's the CSI implementation team stand up.
Okay,
Does
yeah,
that look okay?
that should be okay. Yeah, I think it's I think I think we picked the week right after this. So
Okay.
yeah.
So let me go ahead and create a one-off on the 20th. So February, or sorry, 19th. I keep saying 20. It's February 19, Wednesday at 9 a.m. Pacific time.
Are you talking about January?
Sorry, January.
That's 20th.
Oh, yep, you're right. I'm in the wrong month. Good catch. Wait, is it January? Oh, I'm in the completely wrong year.
Yeah, the 19th of February, I think it's a Friday.
Yeah, okay. January 20, Wednesday, 2021, 9 a.m. To 9:59, and yep. Guest is Container Storage Interface Community. Save. Send. Okay. You should be receiving. Oh no, I set it to 6 a.m. somehow. Let me fix that. Time zone. Okay, so the second update should have fixed it. So now we have a meeting at 9 a.m. on Wednesday, January 20, 9 a.m. Pacific time. Okay, thanks folks. Anything else? All right. Take care. We'll reconvene in 2 weeks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks.